The Havenwood frequency, a small town's darkest secret. Hello, and welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. There are layers to our world, hidden frequencies beneath the noise of everyday life. We live surrounded by signals, Wi-Fi, cell service, television broadcast to constant, invisible chatter. We've grown so accustomed to this digital cacophony that we've forgotten the silence it replaced. We've also forgotten the strange things that can hide within that static. The things that wait for the right channel, the right time of night, the right kind of listener. Today, we delve into a story submitted by a former resident of a small, secluded town. A town that seemed, on the surface, to be a perfect escape. But as he would discover, some places aren't quiet. They're just listening. This is a story about insomnia, about the loneliness of the small hours, and about a local radio station near a park that sometimes broadcasts something other than music. This is the account of the Havenwood frequency. My story begins with a move. Like many people, I had grown weary of the city. The relentless noise, the crush of humanity, the feeling of being a single, anonymous cog in a machine that never slept. I craved quiet. I craved green spaces. I craved a pace of life that didn't leave me breathless at the end of each day. So I found Havenwood. The name itself was a promise. Tucked away in a valley, surrounded by dense, old-growth forests, Havenwood was the postcard image of small-town America. It had a main street with a single traffic light, a diner where the coffee was always hot, and a community that seemed genuinely welcoming. My new home was a small rental cottage on the edge of town, bordering a sprawling, beautiful public space called Whispering Pines Park. It was perfect. Or so I thought. The first few weeks were idyllic. I spent my days exploring the park's winding trails and my evenings reading on my porch, listening to the crickets. The silence I had craved was finally mine. But with that profound quiet came an old companion I had hoped to leave behind in the city, insomnia. In the concrete jungle, my sleeplessness had been masked by the city's own. There was always a distant siren, the rumble of a late-night train, the hum of traffic. In Havenwood, the silence was absolute. It was a thick, heavy blanket that pressed down on me, making my own racing thoughts impossibly loud. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, the quiet almost a physical presence in the room. It was during one of these sleepless nights, around 2 in the morning, that I rediscovered the simple comfort of radio. I had an old, analog clock radio on my nightstand, a relic from my college days. Desperate for any kind of distraction, I switched it on and began to slowly turn the dial. I passed through static, faint whispers of distant talk shows, and fragments of pop songs from stations 100 miles away. And then, I found it. A clear, warm signal. The station identified itself as 103.1 WHVN, the voice of Havenwood. The programming was exactly what you'd expect. Soft rock from the 70s, forgotten folk tunes, the kind of gentle, inoffensive music perfect for the pre-dawn hours. The DJ, a man with a low, soothing voice who called himself Night Owl Norman, would occasionally share a piece of local trivia or read a weather report. It was comforting. It was predictable. It became my nightly ritual. Lying in the dark, listening to Norman's gentle patter and the familiar chords of a James Taylor song, I could finally feel the tendrils of sleep begin to take hold. The radio station itself was a local landmark. A small, one-story brick building situated, oddly enough, right at the main entrance to Whispering Pines Park. A tall, slightly rusted transmission tower rose from behind it, a steel sentinel against the backdrop of the dark trees. I passed it every day on my walks. It seemed as quaint and harmless as the rest of the town. For a month, this was my routine. Wakefulness, worry, and then the warm, analog embrace of 103.1 WHVN. It was my anchor in the deep, silent ocean of the night. Until the night the music stopped. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday. The exact day is a blur, lost to the fatigue that had become my constant state. I was listening to Norman introduce a song by Fleetwood Mac. His voice was as smooth as ever. And now he said, a little something to help you drift away. Here's Landslide on the voice of Havenwood. The opening guitar notes began, clear and familiar. But then, something happened. The music didn't just stop. It was cut off. Abruptly. Violently. As if a wire had been snipped. For a moment, there was only dead air. Pure, unnerving silence where a melody should have been. I sat up in bed, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. I thought the station had gone off the air, maybe a power surge. I reached over to turn the dial, but before my fingers touched the knob, a new sound came through the speaker. It was a voice. A woman's voice. But it was unlike any voice I had ever heard on a radio. It was flat, monotone, without any hint of inflection or emotion. It sounded synthetic, artificially generated, but with a strange, hollow echo, as if recorded in a vast, empty room. And then, she began to speak. Wir. Act. 5. German. I recognized the language instantly from a college course. 4. 8. 5. A pause. Then the voice returned. Nulla. 7. 2. Jedan. I didn't recognize the language, but the cadence was the same. Measured. Rhythmic. Devoid of life. The voice continued, cycling through different languages. Spanish. Russian. what sounded like Mandarin. Each time, it was just a short sequence of single-digit numbers. Cinco, Nuve, Trace, Dva, Shiist, Shiist, Odin. This went on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 or 6 minutes. There was no music, no static, just the relentless, dispassionate recitation of numbers. It was deeply, profoundly unsettling. My cozy, comforting late-night companion had been hijacked by something cold and alien. I was frozen, listening. This wasn't a prank. The tone was too serious, too methodical. It felt official, like a coded message. I had heard of these before. Number stations, relics of the Cold War, used by intelligence agencies to transmit secret messages to spies in the field. I'd read about them online, listened to a few recordings out of morbid curiosity. But that was a thing of the internet, a ghost of a bygone era. To hear one live, interrupting my local soft rock station, was something else entirely. Just as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The flat voice cut out. There was another second of dead air, and then, as if nothing had happened, the gentle guitar of Landslide faded back in, right where it had left off. The song played to its conclusion. I waited, my breath held. When it finished, Night Owl Norman's voice returned, as warm and untroubled as ever. That was Fleetwood Mac with a timeless classic, he said, without a hint of acknowledgement that anything unusual had just occurred. He then went on to talk about the upcoming Havenwood bake sale. I lay back on my pillow, but sleep was now impossible. My mind was racing. What had I just heard? Was it a broadcast error? A strange atmospheric event causing me to pick up a signal from halfway across the world? But the signal had been crystal clear, stronger than the music it had replaced. And why would it stop and start so perfectly around a single song? And why did Norman say nothing? The next morning, bleary-eyed, I tried to rationalize it. A technical glitch. A signal bleed. A dream, even. I walked through Whispering Pines Park, past the little brick radio station, and told myself it was nothing. Just a trick of the tired mind. For 2 weeks, things were normal. Night Owl Norman played his usual selection of mellow hits. I started to relax. I convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing, or at least exaggerated its strangeness. And then, it happened again. This time, it interrupted a song by Simon and Garfunkel. The same sudden cut to silence. The same cold, female voice. Attention, it said in crisp, unaccented English. The word hung in the air, clinical and commanding. 7, 3, 0, 9, 8. A pause. 2, 4, 1, 1, 6. A longer pause. Message ends. Then, silence. And a few seconds later, the gentle harmonies of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel returned, as if they had never been away. Norman, once again, said nothing. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. This time, it was in English. Attention. Message ends. This was the classic format of a number station. It was intentional. And it was coming from 103.1 WHVN, the voice of Havenwood, the station whose transmission tower stood less than half a mile from my bed. My curiosity was now warring with a growing sense of dread. Why was a small-town station broadcasting coded messages in the middle of the night? Who were they for? That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and a notebook. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, tuned the radio to 103.1, and I waited. I was no longer a passive listener. I was an observer, and I was determined to understand what was hiding in the silence of my perfect, quiet town. My kitchen table became my command center. Every night, from midnight until dawn, I would sit with my notebook, the radio murmuring beside me. For the first few nights, my vigil was uneventful. Night Owl Norman's programming was a predictable stream of classic rock and gentlefolk. I started to feel foolish, like a conspiracy theorist waiting for a signal that would never come. I documented everything regardless. Song titles, DJ chatter, commercial breaks. I was looking for a pattern, any deviation from the norm. Then, on the 5th night, it returned. It was 3:14 a.m. The song was Hotel California. As the final guitar solo began to fade, it was severed. Silence. And then the voice. It was the same emotionless, synthetic female voice. Yankee. Hotel. Victor. November. The NATO phonetic alphabet. YHVN. The station's own call letters. It was like a preamble. A calling card. Then came the numbers. 1, 1, 3, 8. Poplar Street. My blood ran cold. That wasn't just a string of digits. It was an address. A local address. I knew Poplar Street. It was a quiet, tree-lined road on the other side of town. 5, 0, 6. Gray. A pause. End. The Eagles' guitar solo faded back in seamlessly. Norman said nothing. I stared at the words I had frantically scribbled in my notebook. 1138, Poplar Street. 506, Gray. What did it mean? Was it a test? A mistake? Was someone in the station playing a bizarre, elaborate prank? The next day, my curiosity overwhelmed my apprehension. I had to know. I drove across town to Poplar Street. It was just as I remembered. Pleasant, suburban, lined with well-kept houses and manicured lawns. I found number 1138. It was a modest, single-story home with a tidy garden and a birdbath on the lawn. A small, gray cat was asleep on the porch railing. I sat in my car for a while, just watching. I didn't know what I was expecting. Men in black suits? A satellite dish hidden in the bushes? But there was nothing. A woman came out to get her mail. A teenager mowed the lawn next door. It was a scene of absolute, mundane normalcy. I felt ridiculous. What was I going to do? Knock on the door? Excuse me, but a ghost in my radio sent me here. I drove home, feeling more confused than ever. The address was real, but what did 506 gray mean? That night, I didn't have to wait long. At 1:22 a.m., the broadcast came again. Yankee, Hotel, Victor, November, 490, Sycamore Lane, 1120, Black, End. The next morning, I drove to 490 Sycamore Lane. It was another unremarkable house. As I was about to leave, I saw a man walking a dog. A big, beautiful black Labrador. The dog's tag jingled as it passed my car. I couldn't be sure, but it was black. And I suddenly remembered the gray cat from the day before. At 1138, Poplar Street. A chilling thought began to form in my mind. A thought so absurd I tried to push it away. Could the numbers be referring to pets? It seemed insane. Why would a sophisticated numbers station be broadcasting information about local cats and dogs? I needed to talk to someone. The isolation was getting to me, feeding my paranoia. I called my friend Chloe, who still lived in the city. I tried to explain what was happening, my voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. A numbers station? In Havenwood, she'd asked, her voice skeptical but kind. Alex, are you sure you're getting enough sleep? I told her about the addresses, the colors. I could hear her typing on her keyboard as I spoke. Okay, so numbers stations are real, she conceded. Cold War stuff, mostly. But they're usually shortwave, not local FM. And they broadcast strings of random-seeming numbers, not pet descriptions. I know it sounds crazy, I said, but I saw them, Chloe. A gray cat and a black dog. Exactly where the broadcast said they would be. It's a coincidence, Alex, she said gently. A really weird one, but still. Small towns are full of cats and dogs. You're tired, you're stressed from the move. You're pattern-seeking. She was probably right, but the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I decided to test my theory. The next time a broadcast came, I wouldn't just observe. I would act. 2 nights later, at 2:40 a.m., I got my chance. Yankee, Hotel, Victor, November, 215, Chestnut Avenue, 844, White, missing. And my heart hammered against my ribs. Missing. This was different. This was an event. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and drove to Chestnut Avenue. Number 215 was dark, like all the other houses on the street. I parked a short distance away and watched. After about 10 minutes, a porch light flicked on. A man in a bathrobe came out, calling a name. Snowball. Here, kitty kitty. Snowball. He walked up and down the sidewalk, his voice growing more anxious. He shone a flashlight into bushes and under cars. I sat in the darkness of my car, a cold sweat on my brow. A small, white cat named Snowball was missing from 215 Chestnut Avenue. The broadcast hadn't just been an observation. It had been a report. A real-time, hyper-local intelligence report delivered in the sterile language of espionage. I drove home in a daze. Chloe's rational explanations about coincidence now seemed naive. This was real, and it was terrifying. The broadcast began to change. They grew more complex. Sometimes, they were just observations. 7 Oak Street. 305 Red bicycle. Fallen. The next day, I'd see a kid's red bike toppled over in the driveway of 770 Oak Street. Other times, they seemed to predict minor, mundane events. 921 Northbridge. 1430 Flicker. The next afternoon, driving over the North Bridge, I noticed one of the streetlights flickering erratically. Who was compiling this information? And why broadcast it? It was like a secret. All-seeing, I was watching Havenwood, taking note of every trivial detail: a fallen bicycle, a flickering light, a lost cat, and reporting it to an unknown listener. My logbook grew thick with these entries. Dates, times, the content of the broadcasts, and my subsequent verifications. I was becoming obsessed. Sleep was a distant memory. My days were spent in a state of low-grade anxiety, driving around town, confirming the cryptic messages from the night before. My nights were spent in tense anticipation, waiting for the cold, female voice. The town itself began to feel different. The charming houses now seemed like dioramas, their inhabitants unwitting subjects of a vast, incomprehensible surveillance. The beautiful, sprawling expanse of Whispering Pines Park, which I had once loved, now felt menacing. Its tall trees seemed like antennas, listening. The wind rustling through their leaves sounded like static. I couldn't shake the feeling that the park, and the radio station at its edge, were connected in a way I couldn't understand. The broadcasts were the language of this place, and I was its sole, unwilling interpreter. I spoke to Chloe again. This time, when I told her about the missing cat and the flickering light, there was a long silence on her end. Okay, she finally said, her voice strained. That's not a coincidence. That's deeply weird, Alex. Like, beyond weird. What do I do? I asked, my own voice a desperate whisper. I don't know, she admitted. Go to the police? What would you tell them? That your radio is predicting lost pets? They'd think you were crazy. She was right. I had no proof beyond my own frantic scribblings in a notebook. I was alone with this. The broadcast continued, a nightly drip of unsettling trivia. But I had a growing sense of foreboding. These were small things. A fallen bike. A lost cat. A broken light. What would happen when the broadcast stopped reporting on the trivial? What would happen when the subject of their cold, detached observation became something more significant? Something human? I didn't have to wait long to find out. A week later, at 3:33 a.m., a new message came through. And this one changed everything. Yankee. Hotel. Victor. November. 1. 8. 4. River Road. 6. 0. 1. Blackout. Imminent. End. River Road was where the town's small electrical substation was located. And this message wasn't an observation. It was a prediction. A warning. I looked at the clock. 3:34 a.m. I waited. 10 minutes later, at precisely 3:44 a.m., my lights flickered and died. The radio went silent. My entire cottage was plunged into absolute, profound darkness. I sat there, in the suffocating blackness, the silence of Havenwood now complete. I wasn't just watching anymore. It was demonstrating its power. And I had a terrible feeling that this was only the beginning. The blackout lasted for 4 hours. I sat in the dark, my mind a maelstrom of fear and speculation. When the power finally returned with the first gray light of dawn, the radio clicked back on. Night Owl Norman was in the middle of a story about his prize-winning pumpkin from the previous year's county fair. It was a jarring return to normalcy that felt more disturbing than the silence it replaced. The official story, printed in the weekly Havenwood Gazette, was that a transformer at the River Road substation had blown due to a freak power surge. A random accident. But I knew better. The broadcast had predicted it. Blackout. Imminent. It had given a time, encoded in the number 601. I couldn't figure out the code, but the sequence was undeniable. I was past the point of casual investigation. This was no longer a creepy local mystery. It felt like I had stumbled into something dangerous. Chloe's suggestion, even made in jest, echoed in my head. Go to the police. But I still had nothing but my own testimony. I needed facts. I needed history. I needed to understand the context of this strangeness. My investigation had, until now, focused on the what. Now, I needed to focus on the why and the who. And in a town like Havenwood, history wasn't in a database. It was in the dusty archives of the local library. The Havenwood Public Library was a beautiful old Carnegie building, all stone and dark wood, smelling of old paper and beeswax. Behind the main desk sat a woman who looked as though she were a permanent fixture of the place. She had sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of half-moon glasses and a formidable bun of gray hair. Her name tag read, Eleanor Gable, head librarian. I approached her nervously, unsure of where to even begin. Can I help you, young man? She asked, her voice crisp, but not unkind. I hope so, I began, trying to sound like a casual history buff. I'm new in town, and I'm interested in its history. Specifically, the history of local broadcasting. I was wondering if you had any information on the radio station, WHVN. Mrs. Gable's eyes narrowed slightly. She studied me for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. An odd topic of interest, she said slowly. Most newcomers are more interested in the hiking trails. What about the station interests you? I'm just a fan of old-time radio, I lied, the excuse sounding flimsy even to my own ears. The building itself is interesting, right at the entrance to the park. Ah yes, the park, she murmured, a strange emphasis on the word. She gestured for me to follow her. The station's history is intertwined with the park's and the town's founding. It's not a simple story. She led me back into the archives, a cramped room filled with filing cabinets and large, leather-bound books. The air was thick with the scent of decaying paper. She pulled out a large, heavy tome labeled Havenwood Municipal Records, 1880 to 1920. Havenwood wasn't founded by loggers or farmers, like most towns in this valley, she began, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. She opened the book to a page of faded, sepia-toned photographs showing stern-looking men and women in severe, dark clothing. It was founded by a society, a utopian community of sorts. They called themselves the Silent Order of the Observant Soul. The Silent Order? I repeated. They were a splinter group from a larger philosophical movement back east, she explained, tracing a finger over the grim faces in the photograph. Led by a man named Elias Thorne. Thorne believed that the universe was not a chaotic system, but a vast, intricate machine governed by a complex set of mathematical principles. He believed that God, or whatever name you wish to give the prime mover, did not speak in prayers or parables, but in numbers, in patterns, in data. A cold dread washed over me. Numbers. Patterns. Thorne and his followers believed that by meticulously observing and recording the world around them, every fallen leaf, every bird's flight, every crack in the pavement, they could discern the underlying language of creation. They thought if they gathered enough data, they could understand the will of the universe and eventually predict its course. She paused, looking up at me to see if I was following. My expression must have been enough encouragement. They chose this valley because of its isolation, she continued. They wanted a pure environment, untainted by the noise and chaos of the outside world. They built Havenwood as their laboratory. In the heart of their experiment, their most sacred ground, was the area that is now Whispering Pines Park. They saw it as a natural antenna, a place where the cosmic vibrations, as Thorne called them, were strongest. I thought of the transmission tower rising from behind the radio station, right at the edge of the park. A modern antenna built on the site of a natural one. They were obsessive record keepers, Mrs. Gable said, pulling out another box, this one filled with handwritten ledgers. She opened one. The pages were filled with columns of tiny, neat script, documenting things like, for 17 a.m., Eastern window pane contracts due to temperature drop. Sound produced, 0.2 seconds. Or 12:52 p.m., gray squirrel drops acorn from third branch of westernmost oak, 14 feet from trunk. It was a primitive, analog version of what I was hearing on the radio. It was the same bizarre, all-encompassing surveillance. What happened to them? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. They faded away, she said with a shrug. The second generation didn't have the same zeal as the founders. The world crept in. By the 1930s, the order had all but disbanded. Their children and grandchildren just became regular townspeople. But the ideas never completely vanished. They seeped into the town's foundation. A lingering obsession with patterns, with observation. Old habits die hard in a place like this. And the radio station? I pressed. That was built in the late 1950s, she said. On land donated to the town by the last direct descendant of Elias Thorne. Right on the edge of the park, where Thorne's Central Observatory once stood. A small stone building where they would collate all their data. My blood turned ice. The radio station was built on the ruins of the Order's headquarters, a place designed for collating information about the world. Mrs. Gable, I said, deciding to take a risk. Have you ever heard strange things on that station? Late at night. She stopped and looked at me, her gaze piercing. The kindly librarian facade fell away, replaced by something sharper, more knowing. I am a librarian, Mr. Alex, I supplied. Mr. Alex. I am a librarian, she repeated. My business is information. Not just the information in books, but the information that floats in the air. The stories people tell, and the ones they don't. I have been the librarian here for 45 years. I have heard many stories. What kind of stories? Stories of cross signals, she said evasively. People hearing things that shouldn't be there. Whispers. Numbers. It's an old station. Old equipment. The official explanation is always signal drift or atmospheric interference. She was stonewalling me, but her eyes told a different story. She knew. She wouldn't admit it, but she knew. This silent order, I asked, a final, desperate question forming. Did they believe they were just observing? Or were they trying to communicate with something? Mrs. Gable closed the heavy book with a soft thud that echoed in the quiet room. Elias Thorne believed the universe was a machine that spoke in numbers. But he also believed that if you spoke back to it in its own language, it might just answer. I left the library with my head spinning. It wasn't a spy agency. It wasn't a military experiment. It was a ghost. The ghost of a bizarre, century-old cult, resurrected and automated through modern technology. The silent order hadn't died. It had evolved. Its data collection, once done with pen and paper, was now being carried out by some unknown, unseen force. And the radio station, built on its sacred ground, had become its mouthpiece. That night, the broadcast felt different. It was no longer just a curiosity or a threat. It felt like a legacy. The cold, female voice was the voice of Elias Thorne's philosophy, stripped of all humanity and perfected. Yankee. Hotel. Victor. November. Coordinates follow. My stomach clenched. This was new. 4.167 north. 7.3.942 west. Monument. Center. Seek. End. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I typed the coordinates into a map application. I already knew, with a sickening certainty, where they would lead. The pin dropped. Dead center. In the very heart of Whispering Pines Park. It wasn't a report. It wasn't a prediction. It was an invitation. The coordinates burned in my mind. 44.167 north, 73.942 west. Monument. Center. Seek. It was the most direct communication I had yet received. The impersonal, observational tone was gone, replaced by a command. A summons. My first instinct was to call Chloe. I needed an anchor to the sane world, a voice that could pull me back from the brink of this abyss. I told her everything: the silent order, Elias Thorne, the librarian, and now the coordinates. Absolutely not, she said, her voice sharp with alarm. There was no skepticism left. only pure fear. Alex, you cannot go there. This has gone too far. You're not a historian or a detective. You're just a guy who wanted some peace and quiet. This is dangerous. But I have to know, I argued, the words tasting like ash. Don't you see? This is the first time it's addressed me. Seek. It's asking me to do something. This could be the answer to everything. Or it could be a trap, she shot back. What if it's not some ghost cult? What if it's something real and modern and violent? Some group that's using the station for their own purposes, and now they know someone is listening. They're luring you out, Alex. Her logic was sound. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to listen to her, to pack a bag, get in my car, and leave Havenwood in my rearview mirror forever. But another part of me, a part that had been nourished by weeks of sleepless nights and cryptic messages, felt an irresistible pull. The mystery had its hooks in me. I had become a participant in the Order's great experiment, and to walk away now felt like leaving a book unfinished, a puzzle unsolved. The obsession had consumed me. I'll be careful, I said, a promise I knew was empty. I'll go during the day. It's a public park. What can happen? Famous last words, Alex, she whispered. Please, just call me the second you get back. The next day, under the brilliant blue sky of a crisp autumn afternoon, the park seemed to have shed its menace. Families were having picnics, children were laughing on the playground, dogs were chasing frisbees. It was hard to reconcile this scene of wholesome joy with the dark history Mrs. Gable had described. I followed the GPS on my phone, leaving the main paths and venturing deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker here, the sunlight more dappled. The sounds of the playground faded, replaced by the crunch of leaves under my feet and the whisper of the wind. The GPS led me to a small, forgotten clearing, and in the center of that clearing was the monument. It was not grand. It was a simple, waist-high obelisk of dark, weathered stone, half swallowed by moss and ivy. There was no plaque, no inscription, no indication of what it was meant to commemorate. It was just there, an anonymous stone needle pointing at the sky. This had to be Elias Thorne's observatory, or what was left of it, the focal point of his entire philosophy. I walked around it, running my hand over its cool, rough surface. I felt a strange vibration under my palm, or perhaps I only imagined it. There were faint scratches on the stone, almost like tool marks, but they formed no discernible pattern. It was just an old, forgotten piece of rock. I felt a pang of disappointment. I had expected more. A secret panel, a hidden message. I stayed for nearly an hour, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The sun shone, the wind blew. I was just a man standing by a rock in the middle of the woods. Maybe Chloe was right. Maybe I built this all up in my head. I went home feeling deflated and foolish. But the night was yet to come. As darkness fell, so did my confidence. The memory of the innocuous stone monument transformed in my mind. It became sinister, its anonymity a threat rather than a disappointment. What if the invitation wasn't for the daytime? The broadcasts only happened at night. The order only worked in the quiet hours. The summons was for the dark. I knew it was a terrible idea. Every fiber of my being screamed against it. But the pull was stronger than my fear. At 2 a.m., I put on a dark jacket, grabbed a powerful flashlight and my small, portable radio backup I bought, just in case. I had to hear the broadcast when I was at the site. I texted Chloe, going back to the park. Don't worry. We'll call you soon. It was a lie to reassure her, and perhaps myself. Her immediate reply was a string of frantic NOS and don't S, but I put my phone on silent and slipped it into my pocket. Whispering Pines Park was a different entity at night. It was a place of deep shadows and unnerving sounds. Every snap of a twig sounded like a footstep. The wind in the pines sounded like voices, just at the edge of hearing. The beam of my flashlight cut a nervous, trembling path through the oppressive blackness. My heart was a drum against my ribs as I found the clearing again. The stone obelisk looked like a jagged tooth in the darkness, absorbing the light from my flashlight rather than reflecting it. The air here was colder, stiller. I checked my watch. 2:58 a.m. I turned on the portable radio, the dial already set to 103.1. Night Owl Norman was talking about the best way to winterize a garden shed. His voice, usually a comfort, sounded grotesquely out of place in this cold, silent clearing. I stood before the monument, my flashlight beam fixed on it, the radio murmuring in my hand. I waited. At 3:14 a.m., the same time as the first address broadcast had happened, Norman's voice was sliced away. Dead air. I held my breath. My hand, holding the radio, was slick with sweat. The cold, female voice filled the small speaker, seeming to echo in the clearing. Yankee. Hotel. Victor. November. Subject has arrived at destination. My blood froze. Subject. I was the subject. It wasn't inviting me. It was tracking me. Observation begins. The voice fell silent. But the broadcast wasn't over. A new sound emerged from the radio speaker. It was a low, rhythmic hum. A deep, resonant tone that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. It was joined by a series of soft, rhythmic clicks, like a Geiger counter, but with a strangely melodic pattern. Hum. Click, click, click. Hum. Click, click. I looked from the radio in my hand to the stone monument in front of me. The sound wasn't just coming from the radio. I could feel it. A low-frequency vibration was emanating from the stone itself, pulsing in time with the hum from the broadcast. The radio wasn't the source. It was the trigger. It was broadcasting a signal that was activating this place. My flashlight beam trembled on the stone. The faint scratches I had dismissed as tool marks now seemed to catch the light in a new way. They weren't random. They were symbols, glyphs, a form of geometric writing that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of my vision. The humming grew louder, the clicking faster. It was building to something. A strange, metallic taste filled my mouth. The air crackled with a static charge that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I was no longer an observer. I was a component, a piece of the experiment. My presence here, at this specific time, was the final variable needed to complete some dark, arcane equation. Elias Thorne's descendants hadn't just continued his work. They had automated it, weaponized it, and I had walked right into the heart of their machine. Panic, cold and absolute, finally broke through my obsessive curiosity. This was not about answers. This was about survival. I had to get out. But a horrifying thought paralyzed me for a second. The broadcast had started with observations. Then they moved to minor predictions. Then they caused a blackout. Then they summoned me here. The progression was clear. What was the next logical step in the experiment? I didn't want to find out. I turned to run, but as I did, my flashlight beam swept past the monument and caught something at its base. Tucked into the moss, almost completely hidden, was a small, tarnished brass plate. I had missed it completely in the daylight. I hesitated for only a second, a fatal moment of my insatiable curiosity. I leaned in, wiping away the grime with my sleeve. There were words engraved on it. Elias Thorne, 1889. The universe is a machine that listens. We must simply learn its language. And below that, a single, chilling phrase. Phase 2, the response. The humming from the radio, and the stone reached a fever pitch. The clicking became a deafening roar. I understood, with a sudden, soul-crushing clarity, that the observations had been Phase 1. Gathering the data, learning the patterns of the town. Now, they were ready to speak back to the universe. To use the energy they had focused here, on this monument, with me as the catalyst. To do what? I didn't wait for the answer. I scrambled backward, turned, and ran. I ran blindly through the woods, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. The humming and clicking sound seemed to follow me, to be coming from inside my own head. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the tree line and saw the familiar, comforting glow of a street lamp. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I called Chloe. She answered on the first ring. Alex, are you okay? What happened? It's not what we thought, I gasped, leaning against the lamppost, trying to catch my breath. It's not just watching. It's doing something. I have to see it. I have to see the station. No, Alex, get out of there. Go home, she pleaded. But I couldn't. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But it was now mixed with a terrible, final need to see the source. Not the monument, the ancient heart. I needed to see the modern brain, the place where the signal originated, the small brick building that had started it all. I ended the call and started walking, not towards my cottage, but towards the radio station at the entrance of the park. I had to see who or what was inside, who was pulling the strings of this ghostly machine. The walk to the radio station was the longest of my life. The strange humming had faded from my ears, but a phantom ringing remained. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I clutched the small, now silent radio in my hand like a talisman. The station, 103.1 WHVN, looked exactly as it always did. A humble, low-slung brick building, its windows dark. A single, dim light shone over the front door. The tall transmission tower behind it was a spiderweb of steel against the star-dusted sky, a silent testament to the invisible power it wielded. I crept around the building, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I peered into the windows. The offices were empty, chairs pushed under desks, coffee mugs left on file cabinets. It looked like any other small business after hours. I made my way to the back. A solid metal door, probably leading to the utility or transmission room, was marked Authorized Personnel Only. Next to it, a small, grimy window looked into what I assumed was the main on-air studio. I wiped a clean patch on the glass with my sleeve and peered inside. The first thing I saw was the source of the station's regular programming. A massive bank of servers and automated broadcasting equipment, all blinking with little green and red lights. A large computer monitor displayed a playlist schedule. This was Night Owl Norman. Not a man, but an algorithm. A pre-programmed playlist and a series of voice files, stitched together to create the illusion of a live, human presence. The whole station was a ghost. But that wasn't what held my attention. The studio was a small, soundproofed room. In the center was a classic broadcast console with a large microphone, but it was all covered in a thick layer of dust, clearly unused for years. The walls, however, were not bare. They were covered, from floor to ceiling, in the same strange, geometric symbols I had seen on the monument. They weren't painted on, they were scratched into the drywall, the plaster, the wood trim. Thousands of them, overlapping, intersecting, creating a dizzying, terrifying tapestry. It was the secret language of the order made manifest. And in the center of the room, sitting in a simple wooden chair in front of the dusty console, was a man. He was old, shockingly thin, with a wild mane of white hair and a long, tangled beard. He wore a simple, dark, old-fashioned suit, like the men in the photographs Mrs. Gable had shown me. He was perfectly still, his back to me, facing the console. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. For a horrifying moment, I thought he was dead, a forgotten corpse left to rot in this strange sanctuary. Then, his head tilted slightly, a slow, deliberate movement, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. This had to be him, the one behind it all. A descendant of the Order, a keeper of the flame, carrying on Thorne's work in secret. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate need for confrontation. I rattled the back door, but it was locked solid. I banged on the window, shouting, my voice muffled by the thick glass. Hey, who are you? What are you doing? The man didn't move. He gave no indication that he had heard me. It was like I wasn't even there. Defeated, I slumped against the wall, my mind racing. What now? Do I call the police? Do I tell them an automated radio station has a dead man or a ghost sitting in its studio? It was then that I noticed the red, on-air, light above the studio door was illuminated. But the station wasn't broadcasting music. It was broadcasting silence. The dead air that always preceded the numbers. I fumbled for my portable radio, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I switched it on. The cold, female voice filled the night. But this time, it wasn't coming from the radio speaker. It was coming from inside the studio. And it wasn't a recording. The voice was emanating from the dark figure in the chair, though his lips didn't move. It was a projection, a ventriloquist act performed by some unseen technology or some unholy force. Final sequence initiated. The voice said, the sound vibrating through the window pane and into my bones. Subject's vital signs recorded. Heart rate, 132 beats per minute. Respiration, elevated. Adrenaline levels, critical. It was describing me. In real time. It was reading me like a sensor. Subject identified, the voice continued, its flat tone more terrifying than any scream. It recited my full name, my date of birth, my driver's license number, information it could not possibly know. I backed away from the window, stumbling over my own feet, a raw cry of terror caught in my throat. The man in the chair slowly, mechanically, turned his head until he was looking directly at the window, directly at me. His face was a waxy, pale mask. His eyes were open, but they were a milky, cataract white, seeing nothing. He was a vessel, an empty shell animated by the signal. He was just another part of the machine. The voice spoke one last time, emanating from the blind, still figure. The language has been learned. The response has been requested. The wilderness will now answer. The on-air light switched off. The humming ceased. The man in the chair slumped forward, his head resting on the dusty console, suddenly looking like nothing more than a frail, dead old man. A deep, resonant tremor shook the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a low, powerful hum, coming not from the station, but from the park, from the direction of the monument. The trees of whispering pines began to sway and rustle, though there was no wind. A faint, pale green light began to pulse from deep within the woods, a sickly aurora shimmering between the trunks of the ancient trees. I didn't know what the response was. I didn't know what ancient, slumbering thing the Order had finally managed to awaken with its decades of numbers and patterns and my own terrified catalytic presence. And I knew, with every shred of my being, that I could not stay to find out. I ran. I ran from the station, from the edge of the park with its pulsing green light and its swaying, silent trees. I ran back to my cottage, the image of the man with the dead eyes burned into my mind. I didn't pack. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and the logbook, me only proof that I wasn't insane. I got in my car and I drove. I fled Havenwood without looking back, the transmission tower of 103.1 WHVN shrinking in my rearview mirror like a final, mocking farewell. I drove for 6 hours, until the sun came up and I was in a different state, surrounded by the mundane noise of morning traffic on a busy interstate. I pulled into a rest stop and, with shaking hands, threw my portable radio and the logbook into a dumpster. I didn't want the proof anymore. I just wanted to forget. I never found out what happened in Havenwood that night. I never read a news report about a strange light or an unexplained seismic event. I never learned the identity of the man in the chair. Perhaps the response was something subtle, something that only the initiated would recognize. Or perhaps nothing happened at all, and it was all a final, terrifying projection to scare me away. I don't know the truth, and I don't want to. Some places are built on foundations we can't comprehend. Some frequencies are not meant for human ears. The silent order of the observant soul set out to listen to the universe. I think, in the end, they succeeded. And I am forever haunted by the chilling possibility that, in the heart of that dark park, the universe has finally started to talk back. The story of the Havenwood frequency is a disturbing reminder that there are old, strange systems at work beneath the surface of our world. Systems of belief, of obsession, of communication, that don't simply die. They just find new technologies, new antennas, new frequencies to broadcast their unsettling truths. It makes you wonder what's hiding in the static of your own local channels, in the quiet hours when the world is supposed to be asleep. Thank you for joining us here at the Wilderness Protocol. If this story resonated with you, or if you have your own encounter with the strange and unexplained that you feel needs to be heard, you can reach us at our email address in the description below. Be sure to subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss our next expedition into the unknown. Until next time, listen carefully. You never know what you might hear.